Hi there, and welcome to the AnimChallenge critique. This month's winner with the theme of Halloween. His name is Dahvid Cuevas from Bogota, Colombia. Congratulations, David. You've done a great job, and you won the contest. So here we go into the critique. All right, so let's take a peek at the animation first. Generally, I like to run through and get a good view before we look at things. I'm glad it's such a peaceful piece of animation. I'm glad there's no violence in it. It's great, it's super surprising, and it's very enjoyable. And I'm glad you won because there's a lot of cool things that you're doing here, Dahvid. First of all, I think we should talk about the successful things. In something like this where you have one character changing into another, you have a character that initially you don't see, and you're introducing a theme. That's a lot of information to get into 13 seconds. So it's essential that clarity was part of what made this a winning piece. And we can see that it has that. It is clear. And how have you done that? A lot of it has been through very clear posing, very non-repetitive posing, and good timing. You know, the characters aside, if you think about it, there's no facial animation on the small character and no lip sync, and yet we get very clearly how he feels about things. And that means there's some great timing in posing it. So let's take a look. We'll scrub through here. So we start off right here. Comes in and a little growl. That's fantastic. You know, what's great is you started off in a pose where he was already bent forward. You don't really need to go through the trouble of having him stand and then bending down and then standing back up. It's great that you already started him bent, so we can get right to the point, which is this. He reaches up. So we see this use of a double hand by Dahvid. Now, in the 2D era, we use smear frames and double images essentially to cover big gaps. So if we needed a hand to go from here to here, and we were already on ones, because remember 2D was on twos and ones, meaning it was either exposed for 2 frames or 1 frame of film. CG is all on ones. And so essentially we're trying to take up that gap. And you've already dragged the hand as much as you can, for instance, or you have it on ones already. What do you do? In 2D, smear frames were created so there would be an effect that would be avoided called strobing. Strobing is basically when there's too big a gap between keys and you see a pop of color where there was not enough drawings taking up that negative space. So that's where they actually originated. Here, Dahvid actually makes use of a double hand, which is a form of smear. And it's pretty well done because really what you want to do is use them where there's the biggest physical gap, or where it would be the fastest, or where the most gravity would take place. So this is great because if you look at the spacing here, and just say we just quickly outline this hand right in this position. Okay. And then we went back to the next frame here. And we see that his next frame is here, essentially. He's created this extra hand to take up that negative space, okay? And then we're gonna go to the next frame. This drawn here. So we have that spacing very clearly shown. Now, the interesting thing about this is that, Dahvid, you did something really cool, and it seems very basic, but it's kind of hard to remember when you're in a hurry and you're trying to get a lot of animation done in a small period of time. And that's right here. You stayed on arc, right? That's very, very essential. You stayed on arc. But the more important thing is you took up some space by using this hand to take up some space, and I'm circling the pink hand because that's taking up what would have strobed, okay? What you might have been able to do perhaps is to move that hand slightly higher, because if we go ahead and look at the frames before that red hand, what you've done is you've kind of created an inconsistent spacing. So this is a bigger gap, and then the gap between the pink hand and the red hand is a smaller gap. Then you create a big gap again with the second blurred pink hand, like the attached hand that you created. To make the spacing a little bit more ideal, and I'm being nitpicky, but I think it's important, is I would have moved this pink hand just a little bit higher. And if you want me to be clear about that, I just would have done this. Just would have done that. Now, why would that make such a big difference? Well, you know, the basic principles, whether you're doing something cartoony like this or something very realistic, the whole concept of acceleration and deceleration applies to all types of animation, whether you're talking about Tex Avery or Chuck Jones or Walt Disney classic animation, modern Walt Disney CG animation, DreamWorks subtle animation, et cetera, et cetera. It's all based off of the same concepts. And here, you don't want to betray your own good idea of spacing by getting that a little bit wrong. One thing that you did do really well is that right here, this orange hand is not overlapped on that pink hand, so you got a nice little soft slow in there, which is really nice. All right, so let's keep going. Then you have a nice camera move. He lifts his head in one frame, pop, comes up, he does a little growl. And you know what's nice about that too is that you didn't use a cycle. It's not repetitive here. It's just a modified cycle maybe. But it's very easy to see. Despite him doing that, he stays in the same place in the middle of the frame to make it easier for the audience to see what's going on, to read it. Now, I can't overemphasize how important it is for the audience to be able to see what you're animating. A lot of people forget, and you get into it and it's for yourself and you want to make it look cool, but you can't forget that you're not making animation to just watch by yourself at home. You have to remember that you've got an audience that has to really read what's happening. And Dahvid, you did a great job because it's very clear. He steps back and sets up that weight, which is nice. He leans back there. What I like here is you did kind of a sophisticated anticipation where you had him twist and drop his center of gravity. And a lot of times people misunderstand, and they always think that anticipations always just go up and come down, or you squash and then go up, or you do a big recoil and you go. It's not necessarily the case. In this case, Dahvid chose to go by the mantra of less is more. And what he does here is not only does he go back and spacing in this direction, but he also rotates him around and actually into the ground. So what he's doing is actually creating a good bit of tension by actually coiling a spring in a way. So we see this here. He rotates around. He uses his head to drag a little bit. His body leads and rotates the screen right. And there's that really important squash. And then this leap up. Now, the one thing that he did do is he placed the screen right foot forward to plant the weight to get him to move closer to camera. It's a big cheat, and normally I think I wouldn't buy it, but the fact is that you have the momentum of the hand that's got the pumpkin, the jack-o'-lantern, counterbalancing that screen right foot moving in and putting weight down. If you had left this screen left hand behind him with a jack-o'-lantern, you might have mistaken yourself and done that because it would create drag, but it wouldn't make sense because he'd be off balance. This way you're counterbalancing that weight and you're giving him good momentum to throw his head forward and complete that arc, which is super nice. Now here, when we watch it in real time, we watch the sweep of the jack-o'-lantern. Oops, that's not real time. That's real time. So as great as smear frames can be, this is too much. It becomes visible instead of just felt, especially since the background is gray and the jack-o'-lantern is obviously bright yellowish orange. You're going to see that. And as cool as it is to do it, you have to remember that whatever tools you're using, they're not there to be kind of shown off. It's really fun to use techniques like this, and it's really fun to use all of the tools out there that are available, Animbot, what have you. But you have to remember that whatever situation you have, you choose certain tools and techniques to serve your animation and not the other way around. And in this case, I think you might have overemphasized a little bit the motion blur here. Also the fact that it's good that you didn't break arc, but this arc, again, with this stretched out jack-o'-lantern does kind of break arc. And again, that's picky, but you're trying to keep that momentum. If it had been me, I would have done less of a stretch for sure. But it has a really great effect. And when we watch it in real time, it looks pretty good. And this is just a little wambly here, a little too long and a little too visible. I would have narrowed it up a little. And then perhaps even here, well, the thing is it's such a large shape, so you don't need any more yellow in your kind of persistence of vision as this pops back. If that shape, if you, David, if you go back and if you intend to go back into this shot, and you make this a little smaller, you can almost even separate it. You don't need this connection, meaning it works, but you could also make it a little cleaner, like this, a little rounder to complete that arc. You could also do that if you wanted. The big thing is that I like what you did is that you tried to maintain the same volume in the stretched out shape as your final jack-o'-lantern, meaning that if you puff that stretched out jack-o'-lantern back up, it would be the same size as the full shaped one. I've drawn mine a little small here. That's probably a little bit better. And you can leave a little gap if you want. You don't need to leave it attached. And then, so what you could do then on the very next frame here is you could have either done a little bulge of a shape to imply weight going back the other way. But I think what you've done is very efficient. Again, my notes are kind of nitpicky, but I think so far what you've shown is really cool. So my biggest note on this entire piece, and it's really fun, is the fact that the most important thing for a character and for the audience is that there's enough thought processing time. David, you do make a really good effort at making this creature have a moment to think that he's dissatisfied that he only got one small candy. So as we go here, he whips it back in. And you can see you follow arc. And you pull that around. And you see what you did here, like we just talked about, you did not attach it. But you did change the orientation of the base of this pumpkin here. So you do arc through, but then this is a little too bent. This curve should have, if you wanted to do it exactly right, should have been a little further up. Like this. This bend that you have here, put it further up like that. It's very subtle. And then, so I would make you see how you have like a root with the stretch. of those stretched lines. I would have done it more like that, because you do end up breaking arc. I would have altered the mouth a little bit like this, a little bit more arc there, and aimed everything a little bit more. And if you look at it, it's really not a whole lot different than what he did. But what happens is you keep some sort of continuity. I might have also taken this jack-o'-lantern and translated it out a tiny bit this way to make sure that that arc is full as possible. But again, these are small, small things. Now, if we look at it and we count here, the candy gets, the mint gets dropped in. I like the delay of the monster looking down, because, you know, there would be a slight delay. And assuming it hits when the jack-o'-lantern moves, which is a very nice touch. You got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So he had 12 frames before he looked up. So it's only about half of a second that he registers that it's small candy. Then he pulls back down. And then if we assume that this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. 17, that's not even really a second. So we had a half second at the top where he had the jack-o'-lantern up and the candy was dropped in. There's about 12 frames of recognition. And then here, we said 14 frames of recognition, starting at when he sees it. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. About 14. So you're 10 frames short of a second. That's a very small period of time to think. It doesn't always mean that you need a character there for 48 frames to think about something. But in this case, it would be nice if you let him sit there another 6 frames right around here to let him kind of register, like, wait a second, I was right. There is just one tiny crap piece of candy. And then you could have him start losing his mind, because then he has a reason to. So here, I don't think there's enough processing time. And also, it's because his head moves from, you can see it moves from screen right to screen left. And since the eye direction, he's got no irises, we can't see that he's really looking in. We just assume that he knows. But the head is tilted down enough to imply that he's looking in there. What I might have done is pulled the bucket in a little and pointed his head down to actually take a really close look to make it very overt and very obvious that here, like this, have him pull it in to take a more direct look inside. That would help the clarity a little bit and to give you a little bit of time to register that he's looking in there. And then it would really, to me, justify then his anger. Now, one thing here, I love the big antic with arm. It's great. I'm surprised that you didn't drag the pumpkin with motion blur here or there, because I thought, to be consistent with your prior technique, that here you would have moved it up quicker. And then here, although you do rotate it, I thought you would have had a blur in here, a stretched out pumpkin that you normally would have earlier in your shot, something like that. I'm a little surprised. And part of that makes me also think that when you're using techniques as specific as smear frames like you're using, it also helps to keep it fairly consistent. I know here you probably said, well, you know, I've used it twice already. I don't want to seem repetitive. A slight tasteful use of this might make sense, because this amount that he's pulling it through the air is actually a further distance than he does either of the prior times, which means this would actually be one of the most appropriate times to use that smear or motion blur frame. So think about that as well, making sure that you stay consistent. and then the swing through. I know this is just a bit of a cheat for you, but the fact that it kind of flies away or disappears into the ground is a little bit of a hack there. And as he follows through and he pulls back up, I like that you draw him back into a very balanced stance. Your animation has a great deal of physical balance, which is really nice. And also too, there's a great usage of the elbows dragging. You rotate the head. I love that you have so much asymmetry in your posing. And then also too, that you leave us with this really clear pose with that U shape in the arms, so that by the time the camera pans up, you drop the head, boom, and you fill out the same creature with the same shape, which is great. Again, just to be a little nitpicky, to me, this here, you have him come around, and I understand why he stops at the edge of the door, but since you're already doing this great drag on his head, why not physically push him into the door a little so his head's a little closer to us? Because that way what you do is that you'll have a reversal to use. Because right now, what you're doing is bringing his face forward. It stops kind of at the plane of where the door starts, and then you move his head to screen right, which is really great to silhouette it, and you reach in with his arm. Something that might have given it a little bit more power was here, when he drags his head in, that his head is partially extended into the doorway, not just to make the effect seem scarier and a little bit closer, but so here, when you push the arm through, you can actually pull his head out. And you can still move it to screen right, but you want to be able to have something to reverse. It gives a lot more energy, and it's a lot more natural to always have opposing action. What you did is kind of flattened it out by going here and then reaching in. You could have gone closer and then oppose like this with a head and body. It would give it a little bit more punch, and it's a very subtle technique. Here, reach in. And again, you could have made this hand shape a little bit more spread out. With the knuckles a little bit less bent. Maybe this one is similar. In fact, I think here we would have that claw out like that with the nail up here. That way we can do another frame where we feel a closure. What we want to do usually is to create some drag like you've been doing in the rest. And if you have the fingers curled in like this, you can see in the next frame, by opening them up, we get a nice spread. It gives a bit more energy, and it allows us to feel like a closure on the next hand. A lot of people think that you need to go out of your way and, for instance, you would need to bend the fingers back, for instance, to feel like there's a grab, That, you can do that, but I feel it's really unnecessary. I think straightening fingers often is enough, but spreading them out is very, very important. Right? Then here, move forward, grab. It would have been nice to see like fingers closing, but I like the slow in when he grabs the person. And then here, I love the drop in gravity, and I love that you lead with the shoulder. But if you're going to do that, why not throw the weight off even more? When he's here, before he starts to pull with the arm, you could have subtly also dropped his COG and had his foot rotate a bit like this. Stretch this out a little. That way you create like an outward, downward force that starts the whipping action of his body. So here, right now, you do spin his knee out and you spread it out, but you could take more advantage by pushing it down. And if I'm gonna misdrew the anatomy of your creature, excuse me, then to be completely accurate. Is something more like that, but the belt would drop as well. This whole level would stretch out. And that way we really get that tension. You can see here, we get a really strong flow through here because we're creating this tension that drives through, down, and out. That might have helped a little bit. Make it feel more powerful. Doesn't mean you need to fully resolve that. I think what you did was after here, you just pull them straight up. And also when you have that folded knee, right now you're just doing a rotation, but that force would also continue outward. And again, here, if you want to be consistent, then why don't you drag her legs behind a little bit and her head behind a little bit. Also, if we look at the spacing on the creature's head, after the shoulder pulls, you expect the head to follow. And then here, big arm space, big head space. Then you narrow the spacing here. So the spacing on the head's a little bit off. I think you can make it a little, it's nice slow out, head tuck, big spacing, medium spacing, big spacing. So you can control that arc across a little bit better. I like that you make a really strong silhouette here, lifting that poor woman into the air. Maybe if you had a moment more, that right here you could have a slight straight. Where she's out here. So we get a little bit more tension out of this, right? So we have this straight of the forearm that we can contrast to the bend. Now, technically, does your animation work well? Yeah, it does. I think here comes up and then he just bends at the wrist and chomps her down. It's totally cool. But I think if you sweep the arm up and you straighten here, it gives you just a moment to pull the arm in and really chomp down even harder. You give yourself somewhere to go mechanically. Like here, if you imagine that red arm, and it gives a lot of dynamics because what you're doing is you're counter opposing tension. It's a really important concept. If you're setting up something powerful, tension in the pose and counter opposing tension. Oops, let's do that in another color so it's a little easier to see. Look at the counter opposing tension you get between the straighter arm and the body pushed back, right? You lose a little bit of that if you stick with your current arm right there. And then, boom. why don't you help yourself out here a little bit? Instead of just reaching forward with his head, move his body and head forward exactly like you're doing. Then go ahead and pull his head back like this. So you're forcing his head upward, which creates a drag. And then on the next frame, here you could continue. I'll do it in a different color. Or you can even stretch the mouth open some more. Like that. And you can see where the existing teeth are in this. Put the little wing on his head, point downward to give an indication. And then what you do is that you create a little drag, which creates a little energy to release. And you show the teeth in a more silhouetted way. And then you close in here. You could almost go straight to this frame. I mean, you might have a slow out, excuse me, from the top, clack. But if you look between the pink drawing and this drawing, you can see probably between the pink one and here, you'd need probably one breakdown. Or you could do a slow in, which would be this head that you have right here. Snap. And then as he has a delicious snack and he decides he doesn't like it, I love the head drag, great job there. If you're gonna do this though, one thing that you hurt yourself with, Dahvid, is that you decided to leave this arm here, and yet the head is coming out here. And as you move forward, that thing stays isolated within the shape of that arm. And then here, we see that this is within the shape of the hand. And then it bounces off. You could have really helped yourself by here, when he's about to spit that head out. Here we go. Nice antic. Why don't you, this arm on screen right feels kind of dead. Why don't you start pulling it back? And then here, I'll clear that one so we can see what we're doing. Get his arm in a place out of the way, and it would counter-oppose also the spitting, right? Now, if you decide you don't want to pull the arm inward, if you feel like, well, I don't know if I want to put this arm and this arm so close because it feels like then this arm should go the other way, then you have another choice, which is to pull the arm back. So if he's spitting out like this, you can actually imagine that this is his chest. Right, his deltoid. You can also pull his arm back here. So he pulls it back like this. And that gives a lot of outward force, like he's spitting as well. I just think either way, across the body in the front or foreshortened going back, you would clear a really nice silhouette of that head and we would catch it. We do see it because we put together the fact that he bit off and then spit it out, but it would be clearer if you move that arm out of the way. And it would also obey physics a little bit better. And then it's a shame that we don't see this just a moment longer. Spit, patui. Here you do some body overlap, but there's none really in his head. It feels a little stiff. I would loosen the shoulders up a little. And then here, I love the little anticipation to the roar. That's great. Just a little bit longer. I would have liked to have seen it like another 7 frames or so. But Dahvid, that was really Halloweeny and really cool, and overall great arcs, really good spacing, very entertaining, a lot of surprises. and it's very, very clear. As you can see, most of my notes weren't necessarily full-on animation notes, but also ideas to really even push the clarity of your piece. Thanks so much for submitting, and congratulations again on winning this month's Anim Challenge, which is Halloween themed. Take care.